Our man in Washington, Kevin Rudd, is looking increasingly shaky in his role as US ambassador. I can reveal more instances of his strident criticism of former President Donald Trump. As we reminded you last week, in the past, Rudd called Trump nuts and tweeted about him as a traitor to the West and declared him the most destructive president in history. But the thing is, this is not just a matter of a former Prime Minister letting loose on Twitter before he was ambassador or using colourful rhetoric in political debate. Rudd's anti-Trump views were deep-seated, carefully explained and repeatedly expressed during his sideline career as a China analyst. In March 2022, Rudd told the Elliott School of International Affairs in Washington, D.C., how Beijing would have greeted the arrival of Donald Trump's presidency.
Who could believe our luck that this madman called Trump could have been elected?
Madman? Again, this is not a superficial aside. This is Kevin Rudd's considered view. Indeed, in his 2022 book, The Avoidable War, about how to avoid a war between the US and China, Rudd's view of Trump created some news. It's quoted here in the Sydney Morning Herald as Rudd says China had made phenomenal progress from 2016 to 2020, courtesy of Donald Trump. The US, as the stabilising fulcrum in the international order, started to wobble. China didn't believe their luck. The diminution of US standing was unprecedented. Yet Rudd's thesis was that Trump gave power to China's arm because Trump weakened the West and the US. As we showed you, it's believed Rudd gave President Biden a copy of his book when he presented his credentials last year. Yet now Donald Trump is back as the presumptive Republican candidate and the front-runner for November's presidential election. And here's what he said last week about our ambassador.
I hear he's not the brightest bulb, but I don't know much about him. But if he's at all hostile, he will not be there long.
While it's clear Rudd couldn't stay on if Trump wins, the trouble is that it muddies the waters for Australia in Washington right now, with crucial issues like the AUKUS nuclear submarine deal in the mix. Clearly, Rudd picked the politics of this all wrong. Here he was speaking at the Asia Society in May 2022.
Well, if, for example, hypothetically, Trump was to recontest in 2024 and to win, and I, on the balance of probabilities, do not accept the argument that he will run in 2024.
Maybe that was wishful thinking by Rudd because he didn't hold back in this academic forum.
Trump could not have cared less about human rights in China. If you asked Trump to take a position on the Uyghurs or on Tibet or any other aspect of Chinese human rights abuses, he would never have done so. And so for those reasons, the essential problem for allies in dealing with the Trump administration, Trump 1 or Trump 2, is its essential internal incoherence because of the essential incoherence of the man himself.
Our man in Washington talking about the essential incoherence of a former president who could turn up in the White House again next year. This is an extraordinary situation. The Defence Minister was asked yesterday whether the government had considered Rudd's strident interventions before he was appointed.
When we appointed Kevin as ambassador, we saw Kevin as somebody who has a lot of experience and skill in diplomacy, having really grown up as a diplomat, as somebody who would bring a lot of prestige to the relationship as a former Prime Minister, and all of that has been put into action.
Not very convincing. I think that kind of means they didn't think it through. But if Rudd is going OK as ambassador, surely that would mean that our government would have some contact with at least someone in the Trump camp, wouldn't it?
Oh, well, I mean, I'm hardly likely to go through answer that publicly.
Is there anyone, though, just without naming names? Are you talking to anyone?
We are doing everything you would imagine that we would do.
Sure. Sounds very convincing, doesn't it? This is a terrible oversight, and it underscores why some of us were right more than a year ago to say the Rudd appointment was a mistake. In December 2022, the actual month that Rudd's appointment was announced, He discussed many of these issues with the Centre for Independent Studies chief Tom Switzer in Sydney. Rudd even suggested that Taiwan might not be defended under Trump.
If you ask people who are close to Trump, what would Trump have done? We had a Taiwan Straits crisis in the period from 2016 to 2020. If you had have asked Bolton that, given Trump's appalling a set of appeasing actions towards Kim Jong-un during that period, the North Korean dictator, it is difficult to assume that Trump would have acted as a normal Republican president of the United States.
Yeah, and then Rudd went on to suggest Ukraine might not have mattered to Trump either.
Trump repeatedly publicly saying, why the hell are we in NATO? What's the point? You don't have to be a Rhodes Scholar sitting in Beijing and saying, I think they're beginning to unravel the network, the global network of American security alliances. Oh. And that's what underpins the argument that I put. Because if he's the commander-in-chief, it doesn't matter who the national security advisor is, they walk in and say, we have crisis X. What would Trump have done in the case of the Ukraine crisis?
Undermining alliances, leaving Ukraine in the lurch. Just remember, these are considered remarks made in scholarly forums, in this case just days before the Albanese Labor government announced that Rudd would be heading to Washington. Australia has a diplomatic problem with all this right now, and it'll become an unavoidable mess if Donald Trump wins. Kevin Rudd's only hope is that Trump's foreign policy advisors haven't heard of Google.